Welcome everyone, and welcome to another episode of Cosciousness Rising in Zimbabwe and beyond. I'm your host, Antonella Bargione, and today with me I have the pleasure to have Ed Thurlow. And he's in England, but his mom is Zimbabwean. So that's been our entry point to know each other one time. When he was here a few years ago, and we did some work together with one of the traditional healer, Baba Mandaza, at Great Zimbabwe. It was a very nice experience to meet him. He's been traveled all over the world, and we'll go more in detail on that, because that has brought him to do what he's doing now. And before I go on your bio, welcome. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's beautiful to be here. Lovely to meet you again.
Online.
I've had some nice, when I was looking for a photo for this, I had a nice opportunity to look at some of those photos of when we visited the Great Zimbabwe ruins, and it's always really nice for those memories to come back up. And I remember having a nice dance with Mandanza and yourself and Marietta by those ruins, which is, I think, been feeding me for quite a while. So yeah, thank you for having me.
So thank you for being here. So Ed has an interest in technology, cryptocurrency, and indigenous wisdom keeping tradition. And after his travel, and because of his travel, he found this collective, which is called S33, where they steward the idea of co-creating and distributing seeds, and to use not only seeds, but also the story library, which is connected to seeds. And so S33, let's start from S33. What does it mean? And then tell us all about of this project, because it's a new way to look at seeds, and it's a new way to create community, and it's just a new energy of relating to each other through seeds.
Yeah, so we pronounce it seed, and it's S33D, and our website is s33d.life.
Okay.
And where did the name come from? Well, I sort of got drawn to the seed, which I'll sort of elaborate on further. But the numbers then we're looking for an alternative, symbol, because seed as an SED is the domains and the websites. You know, I think you probably have to pay quite a lot of money to get seed.com. And eventually I got drawn to these numbers, the numbers threes, and what they've come to represent a few different things to me. But I feel the most appropriate way to start with that is 3 is a very balanced number for me. And it's also a very catalytic number. And the way that I see our project contributing to the future on this planet is that it's sort of seeking to harmonize technology with ancient knowledge. And for me, those two things are sort of very important to harmonize at the moment, because they can help each other a lot. And on the one hand, we have sort of this evolution that has come out of finance with sort of as a reaction to an imbalance in our monetary systems of how money is created, how capital is created, and then how it's been distributed. And Zimbabwe obviously has been, a sort of a brilliant yet slightly horrific example of what can happen when the money supply isn't really influenced or mandated by the total population. And so I got really interested was drawn to Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, because to me it felt like this was an area of like growing freedom and allowing people to choose how they created their value, which is really attention based, and giving people the tools to then choose what they valued. And then on the other side of this, I sort of went down sort of a deep path of contemplation, having like sort of had this epiphany, we now have the tools to sort of create these new value systems. What do I really value as an individual, and what should we be valuing as a collective? And that really led me to the seed. Like, well, I value like the diversity of life on this planet, the mystery of life in all its different material forms, and the stories that orbit those facets of life, which then sort of triggered this awareness that, globally speaking, we're very disconnected, or have been very disconnected from our supply chains. And this technology offers an opportunity to incentivize a reconnection to those supply chains. And that sort of weaves into what a lot of the indigenous wisdom keeping traditions that I've had the privilege to come across seem to teach very subtly, which is sort of connect to your origins. And it's an interesting sort of, there's almost a paradox in there. There's like, you get the feeling, no, there's always this sort of mantra to connect to your origins. But then there's also this sort of subtle, intuitive energy that's given off, that these keepers of these traditions are well aware that as energy, they're eternal. So how can something that's eternal have an origin? And really that's sort of going down this path, and it's not really a destination, our project, it's a path or a flow on really connecting deeper and more sweetly to what we are, whether it's the oxygen we're breathing, or the food we're consuming, or the people we're communing with. They all feed into who we become in the next moment. And I feel like the more we can connect to that awareness, and not necessarily demonize consumption, but rather bring awareness to the inherent creative nature of consumption. If I'm drinking a cup of coffee in London, I can, be feeding a few different future realities with in very different ways. I can be feeding a huge big conglomerate where the philosophy of that company, if they have one, isn't necessarily to honor life. Or I can be feeding a very small project, maybe a small coffee farm in Zimbabwe, where they're growing lots of other different trees and really connecting with the land and preserving, I guess, co-creating with that land, rather than, I think sometimes the word farming it's too extractive, whereas actually what I feel this shift is back to a co-creation with the earth as a being that we're all part of, and our mother. And how can we plant the seeds of that knowing in our sort of popular culture and economic systems? They seem very far apart in many ways. And so our project is really a hope and a vision to bridge this heart-centered knowing of indigenous people. And I use that in a broad sense, not to take it away from any groups of people, but for me, anyone who connects with the earth as a living being, and as part of that living being, is indigenous to the planet. And then, within that broad framework, there are lots of different communities who have connected with a particular part of the planet for, generations and generations. And I feel like those groups of people have something really special and valuable to share with the world at this time, and a, a way of us assisting in that sharing is to sort of curate this wisdom or knowledge around the plants that they live with, and then the wider parts of that ecosystem. And what I sort of, what sort of started off as a journey, like a very, not a material journey, but it was more material based, like, we can sort of create a kinder world by making little kinder choices on what we consume, like the coffee example, or, using materials like hemp and bamboo for our paper rather than cutting down trees. But it's actually sort of transpired that there's something deeper that you're led to along that journey. And that is that we all have this ability, no matter what language we speak, to communicate with each other through our hearts. And that's often a lot easier said than done. But when you have the privilege to sit with some of these cultures or beings who that just comes so naturally to because they've been doing it for so long, it's a great assistance in yourself, communicating in that way. And then everything becomes a co-creation rather than, an individual creation. And we start to look at, where do our ideas come from? Can you own an idea? It's my belief you can't really own an idea, because I don't feel they don't originate on an island, so to speak. They're always connected to your experiences and the people you've met and the land you've sat on and the people who have come before you, and our ancestors. So it's very different to the way I grew up and the culture that I guess I grew up in, and this idea of like ownership and patents and all these like very normal
mine.
Yeah, mine. And yeah, so we started this project to basically formalize this vision and then steward this vision and sort of explore it by experimenting with it. So we built a proof of concept application and a sort of a test, what we call a pod. So the vision is to have lots of local community seed libraries that are sovereign in their own right, a sort of hub of the community, but also portals to connect with other communities who have these pods, seed libraries, and they can then sort of weave together and have this this larger body of a library and share access to knowledge, wisdom, resources, tools, all sorts of things, but on their own terms, rather than someone coming in and saying, I've got lots of resources and that's going to allow me to look at the land that you're sitting on and see that there are more resources there, and I can leverage the resources that I have to extract more of your resources. And if you don't like that, well, I'll use those resources to make it difficult for you to resist my desires, which is seems to be the way that it sort of worked. And it hasn't really worked for anyone, even the people who have or groups who have gleaned more resources out of it, because that's not really what we're I guess built for, is what it feels, or create with. It's not really what we've co-created ourselves to be. We're not these that description I just gave there is very similar to how a cancer cell would work in the body. It just grows for the sake of growth, and it just feeds off everything around it. But then eventually, it kills its host, so it's not very sustainable. And seems to be another way to live, and that's a process of harmonizing ourselves with the environment and the other people around. And it seems to ripple out from.
I mean, going back to cancer a moment, I mean, at the beginning, cancer, the body starts the growth to actually protect the rest of the cells of the body. So it stays just in one part. But then, of course, if nothing changes, it keeps growing instead of disappearing. But it's like it's possible to go to the two ways. And I like when you say about owning the idea, because I mean, we all know what happened with Rooibos and the big German companies coming from overseas and patenting these herbs, this herb that the sun have been used forever, and with so many other plants. I mean, the biopirating has been happening for too long, and yet owning the ideas are divine inspiration in the end. So it's how to balance this separation Monsanto style, where everything is against the land. We have to, this extractive way of doing things, like you were mentioning before, and going towards community, and then to create this possibility of having access to the different indigenous knowledge you were talking about. So that's quite, well, for me, it's very revolutionary. I mean, it is.
Absolutely. What we're really looking for is a way to unify ourselves with our diversity. What are the unifying factors that preserve the diversity of the mystery of life that so many people have become enchanted of, rightly so, enchanted with, and rightly so. And for us, the seed is such a beautiful metaphor and material manifestation for those to be focused around. If a child learns nothing in their upbringing, apart from the fact that a giant oak tree can come out of an acorn small, or a Baobab tree this big can come out of one of those little pods, then I kind of feel like they'll probably be in a pretty good place to move forward. And then it's sort of looking at, well, okay, maybe there are some imbalances on the planet. How can we collectively unify in addressing those balances? And part of that has got to look at, well, why haven't we already done this? And it's probably because we've addressed it the wrong way in the past, and it's often been like a top-down approach, like oh well, I've got lots of money or a big army, and we've recognized this is the problem, so we will be the ones to fix it. But it really has to come from, I think we're starting to see, from the self harmonizing itself, and then everything else ripples out. So you harmonize, you find inner peace, then you let that peace flow out into your home, then into your garden, then into your wider community, and then you suddenly realize, I'm not the only one who's been I don't necessarily like the term work, but putting attention or focus on harmonizing myself with the environment around me. But these other people down the road have been doing the same, or these people on the other side of the world are really resonating with what I'm doing, or what we're doing. And that's the beautiful thing that seems to be happening on the planet to me at the moment, is that there is almost like this divine jigsaw puzzle sort of coming together. And I was doing we have our weekly council meeting today, and I do a little newsletter, and we have like a plant of the week and a word of the week. And I chose the plant of the week was the Baobab tree. And so I picked a proverb to go with it, and it said, wisdom is like the Baobab tree, no individual can embrace it. And I really feel like that's the lesson that we're all learning at the moment, that actually we all need each other, and let's just learn how we can communicate more effectively. And most of that seems to be the sort of the lesson from Mother Nature, or the whispers from Mother Nature, which are quite loud whispers now, is slow down and get silent. And when you do that, your actions come up from a place of being rather than a place of doing, which is just repeating patterns that are ingrained in the mind.
Yes. And at the moment is the time. I mean, the metaphor of the Baobab, I mean, using the Baobab is so beautiful, because if you look at them, they all have such a different personality. I mean, we all know that trees, every sentient being has got a different personality, and the different, they're very different. But in the Baobab, it's so in your face. So it's, oh, grandmother Baobab, oh, that's a young male one. Oh, that's, I mean, it's just like, it's quite, it's so beautiful. And the wisdom of the Baobab, oh my gosh, can teach you so many things. So many things. You were mentioning that you're also collecting not only the physical seeds that are going to be stored in the pod, I mean, as a physical structure, but you are also collecting the stories of the seed. Where does it come from? So, and tell us a bit more about that, because also that part is fascinating.
Well, I feel like the Baobab is a wonderful introduction to that. And as you said, it's the Baobab tree, but they all have such incredible individual identities as, nodes that are reaching for the stars and grounded in the earth. And why is that? And it's because the land that they feed off and feed is different. And, one might have, a hole in it. And then over those hundreds, thousands of years, a visitor, maybe every couple of weeks, has a rest in that shelter when he's traveling across the land, and that changes the tree, and it changes the visitor, and that visitor might be a human, or it might be an owl, and those can all be looked at as stories. The owl has its own story, the human individual has its own story, and the tree has its story, and they're all sort of writing or written into each other's stories. And so with all this experience, we grow and we learn things, and how those learnings or that growth is encoded in the future fabric of reality is not always, an autobiography or a book on the shelf. It can be much more subtle than that. And bring it back to the origins. If you listen to some of these communities who have had an unbroken sort of reverence for an unseparated connection with nature, with the mother, it's there seems to be a lot of focus on these origin stories, whether it's the origin of tobacco or the origin of maybe the Baobab tree, and and it's not necessarily the words that that contain, the core of the truth, but it's often the space between the words. There's a sort of energy that's transmitted in the telling of the stories, but it's a very subtle energy, and you have to be quiet to hear it. And it might be, the energy of, someone sitting under an oak tree. In this country, a lot of the great poets, I'm sure that they sat under oak trees, or, Newton sitting under the apple tree. And it's like, well, then how does that apple tree write itself into our other co-creations? And the apple itself is fascinating because it's such a domesticated, to use that word, domesticated species. Most of the apple trees grown come from cuttings, not seed, because there's such great variation when you plant seed. And I had this really interesting conversation with a friend of mine. It's like, why is that? And it seems to be like the wilder a plant is, the sort of, and there's not necessarily good or bad here, but the more we've co-created with the plant, the greater the variation of its offspring. The more we've left a plant to sort of evolve on by itself, the more similar its offspring will be. So,
wow, cool. Makes sense.
Yeah. So then you look at something like an apple tree, which is sort of a very interesting example in like the UK, and you're like, I'm having this conversation on a computer, which is logo is an apple with a bite out of it, or then we talk about gravity and Newton and the apple, or we can go further and go, well, I grew up where the Bible and Christianity was sort of like a staple in schools. You learn the Bible stories when you were little, and it's like, well, that first Bible story, at least in the way it's come down to me, is about a human taking a bite out of something, that a fruit that's often depicted as an apple. So there's sort of, to bring it back to the seeds, there seems to be a lot more than just the seed. And the analogy I give is, when it rains, I'm told that you need a little bit of dust in the air for the water drops to coalesce around and then to fall. And I see the seed, or I feel the seed is very similar to that. It's from the seed, you can grow a whole plant. But I also feel like the seed is a wonderful symbol to curate this subtle knowledge and wisdom around. And that can start very simply, like, you have a seed, an apple seed, and you can have, people to start voting on or sharing their favorite recipes to cook apples, or poetry that's connected to the apple tree. And for me, it seems the seed as a symbol of the plants is going to become a wonderful way to curate our stories. And I could say knowledge, but I feel that that undersells it. And if you're just curating knowledge, we might be missing something there.
It sounds more like storytelling to me.
Yes, initially it was probably more focused on data, knowledge, and where stuff comes from, which I still feel is important. But I really feel like that's the tip of the iceberg, and beneath that's leading us to the stories, which I feel encode something beyond knowledge. They encode.
It does, because it brings in where we're coming from. I mean, there's got mythology as well, can have mythology as well, the myth of each culture.
And then what's the unifying elements between these cultures? What co-creations of the future can flow out of some of these stories meeting. It doesn't, and meeting on their terms rather than, one meeting and being like sort of snuffing out the other one because they're different. And there was I think it was Hans Bohr, a physicist, who said something along the lines of the opposite of an incorrect statement is a fact, but the opposite of a truth could well be another profound truth. And I feel like we're starting to realize, like, okay, just because the origin story of coffee in one part of the world is different to the origin story of coffee in another part of the world, it doesn't mean that they contradict each other. There can be value in having both those stories. And I think we see that through, the ultimate creation myths. Where did consciousness come from? And some cultures say, oh, it came through Africa, and the Zet Tepi, the line of first time, which links the Great Zimbabwe ruins and the White Lions behind you and the pyramids, and that resonates deeply with me. But then there's always going to be a deeper something beyond that. Well, where did that consciousness come from? And I've started to feel that everyone is sort of the first man or woman. There is, because you can only, I exist, or what was it, something, I am, I exist, therefore I am, or, you can only be sure of yourself, really. You can only be sure of your own consciousness. And ultimately, for me, it all comes back to there is this one unifying force. We are all part of oneness. And that's very difficult to put into words, and probably not meant to be put into words. But then from that come all these beautiful expressions of oneness. And we're just we're meant to play with those gracefully and continue co-creating further expressions. And we just have a choice point in how what sort of game do we want to play? Do we want it to be lightful, joyful, graceful, or do we want it to be hard and difficult? And I, for one, have certainly come to realize that it's a joyful, graceful game that I'd like to partake in, not a hard, difficult, competitive one.
Yeah, and yes, we are one consciousness. And by, I think, going back to the fact of the storytelling, it's like I strongly feel that we are at a time in history where we need to have new stories, write new stories, and maybe being the old, being what it has been up to yesterday, maybe they can reweave
exactly
new stories, and therefore it's like there is Caroline Myss that always brings an example which I love, which is you can look at the same thing. If you, let's say, if you are in a skyscraper, you can be on the ground floor, and from the same event you can have a perception. First floor, you start to have a slightly different. Fifth floor, another one. If you're at the penthouse, you can see the full picture of what's really happening. And so by doing this work, by creating the hubs, bringing and weaving all these, when we say information, again, it's not knowledge, it's stories. Stories, and the story could be also the story of how you till the land, or rituals, or whatever it is, or even technology, why not? And it's all good, but done it in a conscious way.
Yeah, And that's to bring it back to the 2 3s. That's what I really feel like the with our technology, with this side of the brain, we've created like a world brain.
Yes.
And the next step is to sort of connect that to the heart, which already exists, the heart of the earth. And the heart is then the compass to lead the co-creations of this, shared brain that can be seen through the internet. Because without, a heart, it's things seem to just go a little array. The mind, we sort of keep on repeating the patterns.
Yeah.
And the patterns. It needs to
The
be
pattern of
grounded.
separation. The pattern of
Yeah.
separation. Well, this is really wonderful. So I think that for today it's beautiful. I think it's enough, because there's been so much that you have said that needs to be, for people, needs to be integrated. So if people want to find you, you were telling me that you are almost ready to work with a bigger group of people, or to have people coming on board.
Yeah, well, we've started actually. So we have a council meeting every Monday at 6 p.m. GMT. And again, it is sort of early days, and we've opened that for anyone to join. They just have to reach out at the moment, and sort of they'll get an invitation. We can invite them. There's a group as well. I sent you. There's a couple of links that maybe we can put up that we have on Telegram, and I put the invitations up there each week. And the idea is that anyone who joins 3 of the council meetings gets a little bit of our influence currency, and then can vote on proposals to evolve the vision of this dream for a distributed seed and story library. And really, that's sort of starting the curation process. So what other projects or organizations resonate with what we're doing? Let's start to map them out in a database. So, if I'm going to be in Zimbabwe, if I'm going to be in Zimbabwe, well, what sort of organizations might I like to co-create with? Or if I'm going to be in, South America, traveling up for a couple of months, maybe what sort of organizations can I maybe volunteer at? Or if I'm building a project to help map the world's fig trees, what tools and resources and groups of people can assist me in doing that? And really, for this sort of regeneration and this new world story that you implied that we need, and I completely agree with. I feel it's already being written, and we're part of it. And it's just we're doing these sort of things now, where we're just exchanging, we're sharing stories, essentially, that will resonate with people that we're sitting with. So yeah, anyone's welcome to join that, and we'll sort of figure out how to scale it and break it off into smaller groups as we go. But at the moment, anyone can join, and we've had some really great sessions. So we're having our 13th meeting.
People can reach you on Instagram.
S33D Gram, and then we also have a Facebook page, and we've got a Telegram group. I can send you the hyperlinks I already have. Maybe we can put them at the bottom. And there's an email address, and then that's probably the gist of it. And we've got a website which is going to be updated shortly, but it's all a process.
So Ed, thank you very much. And just to close, I would like to talk about the name Seed again. And you have written in S33D, so you mirror the E as a type, as a font. And the number 3 in the tarot is the number for the Empress. and this where the most of the creativity is. And so, I mean, it's absolutely beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. So even without,
I wouldn't take the credit for being the first one to recognize there's something special between those two numbers together. But I think we also have 33 vertebrates in our spine as well. There are a lot of like interesting sort of, I mean, you could probably do a podcast on those numbers alone.
33 is a master number. And so thank you very much. And thank you for all this new work. I mean, you're pretty young still, so you've got a life in front of you to make it really, I mean, this big idea, to make it tangible. And I really wish you the best, because your child, I mean, you've got a very young, less than a year old child. They need to have a world where they can be proud to be living on. So
Absolutely.
Thank you once again. Bye. Bye.